A cold January morning spread its silence over Summit Paws Rescue Shelter, Denver, the city still draped in blue-gray dawn. Icy breath hovered in the air as the staff went about their work, eyes darting nervously toward the end of the kennel row. That's where he was. Rex, the dog no one wanted to walk past, the reason people whispered when they thought no one could hear. Inside his cage, Rex, a hulking German shepherd with a battered ear and a coat marked by old scars, paced back and forth, his paws never at rest. Every step made his muscles ripple. His amber eyes flicked sharp with suspicion, lips curled in a low, warning snarl. Each time someone got close, Rex stiffened, hackles high, daring them to try their luck. On his kennel door, a sign hung heavy with dread: "Danger, do not approach alone." Murmurs filled the shelter, threads of rumor spun tighter every day. They say he's cursed. Last week he nearly tore through the cage. I heard he bit a trainer, bad. This morning, a new volunteer, barely more than a teenager, had been tasked with filling water bowls. She lasted 2 minutes near Rex's cage before stumbling away, eyes wide, hands shaking. In the corner, she broke down in tears, sobbing into her palms as another staff member gently led her away. The shelter, so often a place of hope, now hung thick with defeat. For Rex, there was only more waiting, more fear, more loneliness. In the staff room, Director Mason gathered the volunteers. "We're running out of options," he said quietly, rubbing the tired lines of his face. "No progress. He's been here the longest. If we can't find a way to reach him." He didn't finish the sentence. No one needed him to. The word euthanasia hung unspoken, a shadow in the room. Outside, Denver's sunlight tried and failed to warm the frosted windows. The world seemed determined to pass Rex by, as if he were invisible, except for the fear he left behind. But today, something different was coming. The staff barely noticed the sound at first. The soft hum of wheels on tile, a mother's voice echoing gentle encouragement. Down the hallway, a girl in a wheelchair rolled toward the kennels, her eyes scanning each cage with quiet curiosity. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her as they entered the main hall. Staff exchanged worried glances. "Don't go near the last cage," one whispered to the mother, gesturing nervously toward Rex. "He's unpredictable." But the girl, Sophie Caldwell, only nodded, her small hands tightening on her chair's wheels. She looked straight down the row, past wagging tails and yipping pups, straight at the kennel nobody else wanted to approach. Rex heard the unfamiliar sound, a rolling metallic whisper, and stiffened, body rigid as the pair came into view. His snarl deepened. The hairs on his neck bristled. Sophie's mother started to turn her away, but the girl stopped her, voice soft but steady. "He's not mean," Sophie said, meeting Rex's eyes. "He's scared, like me." A hush fell over the room. Staff watched, breath held, as Sophie inched her wheelchair closer, ignoring warnings and worried hands. Rex lunged at the bars, barking, a savage, wounded noise, but Sophie didn't flinch. She spoke to him, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier. She told him about feeling alone, about being different, about how the world stared at her chair instead of seeing her. Volunteers watched in disbelief as Rex stopped his pacing, lips lowering, the snarl fading into a deep, uncertain whine. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The wildest dog in the shelter, motionless, eyes locked on the girl who wasn't afraid to see him as more than a monster. Director Mason watched from the doorway, heart pounding. Staff whispered, "What if she gets hurt? What if this works?" A cliffhanger lingered in the charged silence, nobody sure what would happen next. But for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope flickered in the air, fragile but real. The girl who rolled through the doors wasn't just another visitor. She was something the shelter hadn't seen in a long time. A chance. And Rex, still standing, still wary, watched her with a look no one could quite describe, somewhere between fear and longing, as if he were remembering what it felt like to hope. The sun was climbing higher now, throwing shards of gold through the cloudy shelter windows. Staff and volunteers busied themselves with food bowls, laundry, the endless cycle of cleaning. But most kept their eyes on the end of the kennel row, drawn to the new, strange energy building there. Sophie Caldwell's wheelchair hummed quietly over the tile, its movement catching Rex's ear with every gentle turn. Each time she rolled forward, Rex's entire body went tense, as if he couldn't decide whether to bolt or bite. Most people would have frozen or backed away, but Sophie's gaze never wavered. She didn't look at Rex with pity or fear. Instead, her face was open, curious, even a little defiant, her mother's gentle hand steady at her shoulder. "Please, ma'am, it's not safe," a staff member pleaded, stepping between Sophie and the kennel. "This dog, he's unpredictable. We can't risk it." But Sophie's mother, tired but patient, looked down at her daughter. "Are you sure, honey?" Sophie nodded, determination settling in her jaw. "I just want to talk to him. You can stay right here." Her mother hesitated, torn between fear and faith, but Sophie's calm was unshakable. With a nod, she allowed her daughter to wheel herself closer, keeping a cautious eye on the trembling, volatile mass of fur and muscle behind the bars. The shelter fell silent except for the low, rhythmic squeak of Sophie's wheels. She stopped just outside Rex's cage. He lunged, a deep bark echoing down the hallway, a sound that made even grown men flinch. But Sophie sat still, hands gripping her armrest so tightly her knuckles blanched. Rex snarled again, lips curled, amber eyes wide with panic and warning. Staff and volunteers clustered at a distance, hearts pounding. The air in the shelter was thick with the kind of tension that turns minutes into hours. Sophie swallowed, her voice small at first. "Hey, big guy," she said, eyes locked with Rex's. "I know you're scared. I know you don't trust anybody here. I don't blame you." Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "You don't have to be scared of me." "I'm not here to hurt you." Somewhere behind her, a volunteer muttered, "She's crazy." Another whispered, "He's going to snap." Sophie's mother stood ready, a single step away, but Sophie just kept talking, softly, honestly, her words threading through the bars. "I used to run, you know. Before the accident, I used to race down the street faster than all the boys at school. Then, one day, I woke up in a hospital and my legs just didn't work anymore." She took a shaky breath. "People look at me different now. Like I'm broken. Like I can't do anything for myself. But I'm still me, you know?" She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I bet people look at you that way too." Something in Rex shifted. His barking faded to a deep, uncertain growl, and he took a step back, his ears twitching as he listened. He watched Sophie, not her chair, not her mother, not the staff, but Sophie, her voice trembling in the cold, her courage somehow bigger than her fear. Sophie glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. She leaned forward, resting her hand gently on the bar. "It's hard being different, hard when everyone thinks you're just trouble." Rex's breathing slowed, his body lowering until he sat on his haunches. The growl disappeared, replaced by a low, pained whimper. It was the first time any of the staff had heard such a sound from him. Across the room, Director Mason exhaled, his face creasing in surprise. "Is this really happening?" he whispered to no one in particular. Sophie's mother, eyes shining with tears, knelt beside her daughter, squeezing her hand. "You're doing great, sweetheart." The shelter staff watched in stunned silence as Sophie kept talking about nights spent awake, listening to the wind against her window, about the ache of wanting a friend who truly understood. She spoke of pain, of anger, of being invisible. And with every word, Rex's guard seemed to slip, his eyes blinking, his nose pressed to the bars, trembling but curious. "He's not mean," Sophie repeated softly. "He's just scared, like me." The energy in the room began to change. Where there had been fear, now there was a trembling hope. The volunteers who had whispered curse and lost cause now stood quietly, watching as something fragile and miraculous unfolded before them. Then, without warning, Rex took a step closer to the bars, his nose mere inches from Sophie's outstretched hand. He didn't bark, he didn't snarl, he just waited. Sophie closed her eyes, exhaling slow. "You can trust me, Rex. I won't hurt you." The shelter director signaled for the staff to hold back, to give the moment space. For a few breaths, the only sound was Rex's heavy breathing, the distant ring of a phone, and Sophie's soft, steady voice. In that suspended, trembling moment, the shelter felt less like a prison and more like a church. Every heart in the room praying for a breakthrough, no one daring to move or speak. Would Rex snap, proving everyone's fears right? Or would something deeper, something battered and buried but not yet broken, finally break through? That question hung in the air, heavy as the winter sky outside. But Sophie, her courage lighting the shadows, refused to look away. And for the first time, so did Rex. The day after Sophie's first visit, the mood inside Summit Paws rescue shelter had shifted. Barely perceptible, but real. For months, Rex's cage had been a no-go zone, a place volunteers hurried past, pretending not to notice the deep scratch marks on the concrete floor or the dented metal bars. Now, everyone stole glances down the row, wondering if the impossible had really begun. It was mid-afternoon when Sophie and her mother returned, the hum of her wheelchair again echoing through the main hall. Sophie's face was paler today, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying a sleepless night. Still, she was determined, and she wheeled herself straight toward Rex's kennel without hesitation. Rex was waiting, pressed against the bars, his eyes already tracking her movement. He didn't bark or growl, but his muscles were taut, ready to spring, to flee, to defend. Staff hovered nearby, hands clenched, hearts in their throats. Sophie's mother set a folding chair by the kennel so she could sit at eye level with her daughter. "I'll be right here," she whispered, brushing a stray hair from Sophie's cheek. Sophie nodded. She pulled her blanket tighter around her lap and began to talk, her voice steady but soft. "Hey Rex, it's me again. I didn't sleep much last night. Kept thinking about you, about what it must be like, locked up, feeling like nobody's ever going to give you a chance." The shelter grew quiet as she continued. Sophie told Rex about the world before her accident, racing friends down hills, laughing until her sides hurt, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She confessed her anger, the days she wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, and the nights she lay awake, wishing for something, someone, to make her feel less alone. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Sometimes I hate this chair. Sometimes I hate the way people look at me like I'm made of glass. I just want a friend who gets it, who doesn't care about all the stuff on the outside." Rex listened. The longer she spoke, the more his body relaxed. He lay down, chin on his paws, ears forward. He watched Sophie, eyes flickering with something between caution and longing. Time seemed to slow. The bustle of the shelter faded. Sophie's mother watched with silent awe as her daughter and the dog forged a connection with no words, just presence. The staff, many of them veterans hardened by heartbreak and disappointment, found themselves rooted in place, unable to look away. After a while, Sophie's hand, trembling with nerves, slipped through the cold steel bars. For a moment, Rex flinched, jerking back, eyes wild. A volunteer gasped and took a step forward, but Sophie's mother shook her head. "Don't interrupt, let it happen." Sophie waited, hand still and open, palm up. "It's okay, Rex," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until you're ready." Seconds dragged. Then, with agonizing slowness, Rex stretched his neck, nostrils flaring, breath huffing against her skin. He touched her fingers with the tip of his nose, testing, uncertain. Sophie's face broke into a trembling smile, tears shimmering in her lashes. "Good boy," she said, her voice catching. "You did it." A hush swept over the shelter. Someone in the back wiped their eyes. Another covered her mouth in disbelief. Even Director Mason, who'd seen hundreds of dogs pass through, stood frozen, his throat tight. For the first time since Rex had arrived, hope felt bigger than fear. Rex's tail gave a single, uncertain wag. Sophie, emboldened, let her fingers gently stroke the fur on his muzzle, coarse, warm, real. Rex closed his eyes for a moment, his massive body relaxing as if he'd been holding his breath for months, and was finally able to let it go. Sophie kept talking. She told him about her dreams, running again, swimming in the lake, dancing at her cousin's wedding. She described her nightmares too, the shadows, the sense of falling, the moments when the world felt too heavy to bear. Rex listened to it all. When she spoke about being afraid, his ears flattened in empathy. When she laughed, a soft, rusty sound, Rex's tail thumped the floor. The staff drifted away, some unable to watch the tenderness without their own hearts aching. But a few stayed, compelled by the sight of something so simple and so rare, trust, flickering back to life. Sophie's mother reached through the bars herself, laying her hand on Rex's broad head. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling, "for trusting her, for letting her in." The connection, once so fragile, began to root itself in that afternoon light. Each moment was a revelation. Rex's eyes closing, Sophie's laugh echoing off concrete, the sense that something irreversible had begun. The shelter's director wrote in his notebook, "Today, we witnessed a miracle." As the sun sank lower, Sophie finally said goodbye, promising Rex she'd be back tomorrow. Rex didn't bark or pace when she left. He lay at the edge of the kennel, eyes fixed on the door, waiting, not for escape, but for her return. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was hoping. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet routine blossomed at Summit Paws Rescue Shelter, one nobody could have predicted when Rex first arrived. Each day, Sophie and her mother would wheel through the glass doors, Sophie's smile tentative but hopeful, her mother's arm always gently resting on her shoulder. The shelter staff, once skeptical, now greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and growing respect. With each visit, the distance between Sophie and Rex shrank. She would sit for hours beside his kennel, a worn blanket draped over her lap, her schoolbook stacked neatly on her chair. Sometimes she'd read to Rex, her voice rising and falling in the hush of the shelter. Other times, she would simply talk, sharing details of her life that no one else seemed to understand. "Today at school," Sophie confided one gray morning, her voice barely above a whisper, "they laughed at me in the cafeteria. Said I'd never keep up if there was a fire drill." She paused, her eyes shining with something sharp. "I wanted to tell them how fast I used to be, but they wouldn't listen." Rex, curled against the bars, lifted his head, eyes never leaving her face. His tail would twitch when Sophie spoke, a subtle rhythm of understanding. Sometimes, when her words faltered, he would nudge the bars with his nose, as if urging her to keep going. Sophie's mother, always near but never intrusive, watched these interactions with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. She remembered the months after the accident, her daughter lost in a fog of pain and silence, her laughter a memory gathering dust. Now, in this unlikely friendship, she saw glimmers of the girl she once knew. On weekends, Sophie's mom brought sandwiches and lemonade. She and Sophie would picnic beside Rex's kennel, sharing bites through the bars. It wasn't a park, it wasn't freedom, but it was something. Staff would pass by, some with shy smiles, some lingering to listen as Sophie described her nightmares, dreams where her legs worked, where she ran and no one stared, but always woke up feeling heavier, the world colder. "I don't want to be brave all the time," she confessed to Rex one rainy afternoon, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Sometimes I just want to be scared, or angry, or just not alone." Rex, sensing her pain, pressed his head so hard against the bars that the fur on his brow ruffled. With trembling fingers, Sophie stroked his muzzle, her touch gentle but sure. For a moment both seemed to breathe in sync, the girl and the dog, bound by invisible threads of loss and longing. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that the shelter was visited by a stranger, a broad-shouldered man in a faded police jacket, gray at the temples, a limp in his step. He stopped short when he saw Rex lying calmly at Sophie's side. "Impossible," he muttered, voice rough. Director Mason hurried over. "Officer Harrow, this is Sophie. She's been visiting Rex every day. We've never seen him like this." Sophie's mother looked up, curious but wary. "You knew Rex before?" The man nodded, his face shadowed with memory. "He was my partner, best K9 I ever worked with, until he got hurt. Some men broke into a house and they hurt him bad. He started biting, couldn't trust anyone, not even me. I begged them not to give up on him, but the force. They sent him here." He rubbed his eyes. "I always wondered if he'd ever trust again." Sophie reached through the bars, her hand finding Rex's head. "He's not mean," she said quietly. "He's just sad, like me." The officer watched, tears shining in his eyes, as Rex leaned into Sophie's hand. "You're a miracle worker, kid," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought he was lost for good." That night, as the shelter lights dimmed, Sophie and her mother walked out in silence, their shadows long on the pavement. Her mother's eyes were wet, but her smile was real for the first time in months. "You know, Sophie," she said softly as she buckled her daughter into the car, "I think you're healing him just as much as he's healing you." Sophie looked out the window, Denver's city lights sparkling in the dusk. "I hope so, Mom. I really hope so." The next morning at school, Sophie's laughter startled her classmates. At lunch, when someone whispered about that weird dog girl, Sophie only shrugged, a new confidence in her spine. She was still different, still navigating a world that moved too fast and judged too quickly, but she was no longer alone. At the shelter, the transformation was just as profound. Rex's ears now perked whenever Sophie's voice echoed down the hallway. He wagged his tail when she read stories, pressed his muzzle against the bars for her gentle touch. The staff, once cautious, now smiled when they passed his kennel. The shelter no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place where healing was possible. Officer Harrow started visiting too, bringing old photos of Rex in his police vest, stories of the cases they'd cracked together. He confessed his regrets, the guilt he'd carried for leaving Rex behind. Sophie listened, and in her acceptance, the officer found a measure of forgiveness, for Rex and for himself. As autumn sunlight streamed through the shelter windows, Sophie and Rex sat together, two souls stitched back together by pain, resilience, and the slow, steady work of trust. They weren't fixed, not yet, but they were healing. And in that healing, they found a kind of hope neither had dared to dream. Winter's grip lingered in Denver as icy wind chased dried leaves across the shelter's parking lot. Inside Summit Paws, the routine had become almost sacred. Sophie's wheelchair squeaking down the hall, Rex waiting by the kennel door, staff glancing over with hope instead of dread. For weeks now, Sophie and Rex had created their own world inside those walls, a world built on gentle words, shared silences, and the kind of trust that's born only from pain. But one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Sophie and her mother arrived, arms full of supplies, Rex's favorite treats, a new leash, a soft blue blanket. There was an undercurrent in the air, a sense of something shifting. After hours spent together, stories, quiet touches through the bars, laughter rising despite old wounds, Sophie turned to her mother, eyes shining with fierce determination. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to give away her nerves, "can we bring Rex home? I know he's a lot, but I want him with us. I need him." The shelter's director, Mr. Mason, stood nearby, his expression guarded. He'd seen hope kindled and crushed too many times before. "That's a big decision, Sophie," he said gently. "Rex has been through a lot. He's not like other dogs. He needs patience, stability, and a lot of understanding." Sophie's mother looked at her daughter, a small, determined girl whose life had been split in two by tragedy and who now glowed with a kind of light she hadn't seen in months. She glanced at Rex, who pressed his massive head against the bars, brown eyes pleading, tail wagging so hard his whole body shuddered. "I don't know if we're ready, Sophie," her mother said, worry creasing her brow. "You need a lot of care. So does he. What if something goes wrong?" Sophie's face clouded for a moment, but then she took a shaky breath. "We're both broken, Mom, but together, maybe, we can help each other." Mr. Mason stepped forward, his tone softening. "Honestly, I've never seen Rex trust anyone the way he trusts Sophie. The staff all say the same thing. He needs her and she needs him, but I can't approve this unless you're all sure." That night, at home, Sophie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart hammering in her chest. Her mind played out every possibility. Rex biting a neighbor, Rex cowering in a corner, Rex running away, or worse, Rex sent back to the shelter, lost and alone. But then another image took over. Rex's head in her lap, his eyes soft, his body at peace for the first time in years. She imagined rolling down the sidewalk with Rex trotting beside her, people staring not out of pity but awe. In her dream, she and Rex were whole. They ran together, unburdened, joyful, the world unable to touch them. The next morning, Sophie and her mother sat quietly at the kitchen table. Sunlight slanted through the window, painting patterns on the worn wood. Sophie picked at her toast, waiting. Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. "I thought about what you said, sweetheart," her mother whispered. "If you're sure, really sure, I'll support you. We'll give Rex a real chance." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as she nodded, unable to find words. Back at the shelter, the mood was electric. Staff gathered as Mr. Mason slid open Rex's kennel for the first time in months, his movements slow and deliberate. Rex, wearing a borrowed collar and leash, looked from Sophie to her mother, unsure. Sophie rolled forward, her hand outstretched. "Come on, big guy, you're coming home." Rex hesitated, then took a shaky step toward Sophie, his tail wagging low. As they made their way down the hall, volunteers lined up to watch. Some cheered, others wept. The girl and the dog, once both considered hopeless, were heading into the world together. Sophie's mother signed the adoption papers with a trembling hand, Mr. Mason looking on. "You're saving him," he said softly. "But he's saving you too." As they left, Rex walked beside Sophie's wheelchair, his head held high, every step a small miracle. At the car, Sophie wrapped her arms around his massive neck, burying her face in his fur. "We'll be safe together," she promised, her voice muffled but sure. "I won't let you go." The first night at home was tense. Rex paced the living room, sniffing every corner, barking at his reflection in the glass door. Sophie set out his new blue blanket beside her bed, patting the space. "This is yours," she whispered. Rex circled, uncertain, before finally curling up, never taking his eyes off Sophie. Her mother watched from the doorway, nerves tight but heart swelling. She saw something in her daughter she'd feared was lost forever. Hope, fragile but burning bright. As the night deepened and Denver's city lights shimmered beyond the window, Rex drifted off to sleep, his breathing slow and even. Sophie watched him, her own eyelids heavy, comforted by the sound. They weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but for the first time, they weren't alone. They had taken a leap of faith, two broken souls betting everything on each other. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they could win. The Caldwell house was small but cozy, sunlight warming the faded hardwood floors. For Rex, every room was a new world, filled with scents, sounds, and challenges he'd never faced. The first morning was a blur of discovery. Rex padded behind Sophie's wheelchair as she rolled from kitchen to living room, both cautious, both curious. The quiet was unfamiliar, every creak of the floorboard and ring of the doorbell sending Rex's ears flicking, his body poised to defend. Sophie's mother moved slowly, giving Rex space but watching closely. She'd read every article she could find about traumatized dogs and how to help them adapt, but nothing could have prepared her for the anxious energy that buzzed through the house. When Sophie turned on the blender for her morning smoothie, Rex bolted under the table, barking, hackles raised. It took half an hour for him to calm, Sophie whispering, "It's okay, boy. Just a noise. You're safe." That first day, Rex found hiding places, under the bed, behind the couch, pressed into corners. He barked at the television, growled at his own reflection, and cowered from the vacuum cleaner. Sophie never yelled or scolded. She offered treats, soft words, and when Rex finally crawled out, her favorite blanket. That night, Rex curled up beside her bed, the blanket clutched between his teeth, guarding her as she slept. Sophie's mother peeked in before turning out the hall light. She found Rex's huge body curled protectively at her daughter's side. For a moment, she let herself believe this might really work. But the outside world posed its own tests. On their first walk around the block, Sophie's mother pushed her chair, Rex trotting awkwardly alongside on a leash. Neighborhood kids paused in their play, eyes wide, whispers flitting between them. "That's the mean dog from the shelter," one boy said, backing away. Another girl stared at Sophie's wheelchair. "Why would you want a broken dog?" Sophie's cheeks flushed, but she held her chin high. He's not broken. He just needs time, like I did. Rex pressed closer to Sophie's chair, wary but trusting. Each step was a test, for him, for her, for the people who watched. Sophie's mother smiled, proud of her daughter's poise, but worry still twisted in her gut. In the weeks that followed, life took on a new rhythm. Rex startled at sirens, cowered during thunderstorms, and whined at the mail carrier's knock. But little by little, the home that once felt alien to him became a sanctuary. Sophie's gentle persistence taught him the rules: sit for a treat, wait at the door, sleep beside her bed instead of pacing all night. There were setbacks. One evening a pan clattered to the kitchen floor, and Rex bolted, knocking over a lamp and sending glass scattering across the tile. Sophie's mother shouted, startled, but Sophie steadied her voice, reaching out. "Come on, Rex, you're okay." After a tense minute, Rex slunk back, tail tucked, and rested his head on Sophie's knee. She stroked his ears, whispering, "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here." Gradually, trust replaced fear. Sophie started inviting Rex onto her lap, giggling as his massive paws draped over her legs. Sometimes after school, she'd tell him about her day: bullies in the hallway, a tough math quiz, a teacher who called her brave in front of the whole class. One afternoon, as they made their way home from the corner store, Sophie's wheelchair caught on a crack in the sidewalk. She teetered, wheels wobbling, panic flashing in her eyes. Before her mother could reach her, Rex barked, sharp, urgent, and nudged her chair back to safety, his body blocking her from tipping. Neighbors watched, stunned, as Rex sat beside her, tongue lolling, chest heaving from the excitement. Word spread quickly. The dangerous dog had saved Sophie. Neighbors who had once crossed the street now stopped to ask questions, their voices softer, their glances less fearful. Some offered treats, others asked if Rex could meet their dogs. Each interaction chipped away at the walls that had kept both Sophie and Rex isolated. Sophie's mother watched her daughter blossom. She saw the girl who had once retreated from the world now venturing out, Rex a loyal shadow by her side. Each night, as she tucked Sophie into bed, she'd find Rex already there, watchful, steady, home. For Rex, the days of pacing a concrete cell were gone. Now there were morning sunbeams to chase, smells in the backyard to explore, and a family who waited for him at the end of every day. He was still wary of loud noises and strangers, but in the Caldwell house he learned to trust the sound of laughter, the warmth of a hand, the promise that nobody would ever hurt him again. And for Sophie, who had once believed her life was forever marked by loss, there was a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before the accident. She no longer felt like a burden or an outsider. With Rex, she was simply Sophie, fierce, kind, and whole in a way she hadn't thought possible. As winter thawed into spring, the Caldwell home rang with a new kind of music. Paws skittering on hardwood, wheels humming across tile, and the laughter of a girl and her dog, both learning day by day what it means to be safe, to be loved, and to belong. Spring in Denver painted the city with hope, blossoms on every branch, laughter drifting through open windows, and for Sophie Caldwell, a new confidence humming in her veins. The once timid girl was now a familiar sight rolling through the neighborhood, Rex faithfully by her side. The dog who once sent people crossing the street now stopped traffic for a different reason: curiosity, admiration, and slowly, acceptance. Word of Rex's rescue spread fast after he saved Sophie on the sidewalk. Neighbors began greeting Sophie and her mother with friendly waves and warm questions. People who had once whispered dangerous now offered shy smiles. Children who'd avoided Rex asked to pet him, watching in awe as the big German shepherd leaned gently into their hands, tail wagging with cautious joy. It wasn't long before Sophie's story caught the attention of her elementary school. Miss Herrera, the school counselor, called one evening. "Sophie, would you and Rex come speak to the students at our assembly next week? I think your story could inspire a lot of kids and adults." Sophie's hands trembled as she hung up the phone, nerves swirling with excitement. That night, she confessed to Rex as he lay at her feet, "I'm scared, but maybe if you're with me, I'll find the words." The morning of the assembly, Sophie's mother dressed her in her favorite yellow dress and brushed her hair back with careful hands. Rex wore a new blue collar, a badge that said, "In Training, Therapy Dog." The entire ride to school, Sophie rehearsed what she'd say. She remembered every moment she'd felt judged, every time she'd wanted to disappear, and every time Rex had met her at eye level, never looking away. Inside the gymnasium, hundreds of eyes turned to Sophie as she rolled onto the stage. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the principal's introduction. Rex, sensing her nerves, rested his head on her knee, steady and warm. She took a deep breath. "Hi," she began, her voice small at first. "I'm Sophie. This is Rex. People used to call him dangerous. People look at me and see someone broken, but we both know what it's like to be judged by what's outside, not what's inside." She told the story of the shelter, of being scared and angry, of finding friendship where no one expected it. She described the first time Rex let her touch his muzzle, the first night he slept beside her bed, the day he barked for help and saved her from the curb. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke of second chances and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone who's been hurt. When she finished, the gym was silent. Then, as if a dam had burst, hands shot into the air. Kids wanted to pet Rex. Parents wiped their eyes. Teachers came forward, offering thanks and hugs. Miss Herrera knelt beside Sophie, her own eyes shining. "You changed a lot of hearts today, sweetheart. Thank you." Inspired by Sophie and Rex, the school launched a fundraiser for Summit Paws Rescue. Posters went up in every hallway. "Adopt, don't judge. Second chances for dogs like Rex." By month's end, enough money had been raised to renovate 3 kennels and provide training for more staff. Sophie and her mother visited the shelter to deliver the check in person, greeted by cheers from the staff and grateful wagging from the dogs. As the school year went on, Sophie and Rex became something of local celebrities. The mayor invited them to the Spring Festival, where Sophie gave a short speech about courage and kindness, and Rex received a medal from the city for his extraordinary bravery and service. Local news stations came for interviews. Parents began calling Sophie's mom, asking how they could help their own kids and pets overcome fear and loneliness. But the greatest change happened quietly, at home and at school. Kids who once bullied Sophie now smiled and waved. Some even asked for help with homework or to join her at lunch. Parents encouraged their children to see past differences, to ask questions instead of making judgments. One afternoon, a boy named Tyler, who had always been the loudest with his teasing, came up to Sophie and with a blush asked if he could walk Rex with her after school. She smiled, and together, with Rex between them, they walked the block, talking about everything and nothing at all. Rex, meanwhile, thrived in his new role as therapy dog in training. Sophie and her mother attended Saturday classes at a local training center. With each lesson, sit, stay, comfort on command, Rex gained confidence, and so did Sophie. Her laughter grew fuller, her voice steadier, Rex's tail thumping at every new success. The two learned together, a team built on patience and trust. The Caldwell home felt brighter than it had in years. Sophie's mother found herself humming as she cooked dinner, sharing stories of her own childhood over the table. There were setbacks, moments when Rex was startled by a thunderstorm, or Sophie had a hard day at school, but they always faced them together. By summer it was clear, Sophie and Rex had changed more than each other. They'd changed their town. The barriers of fear and stigma had been broken down, one story, one wagging tail at a time. And as the sun set on another perfect day, Sophie lay in bed. Rex sprawled across her feet, both breathing easy, hearts finally at home. Summer arrived in Denver with a burst of life. Open windows, festivals, the scent of grilled food swirling through the city. Sophie and Rex were everywhere, leading the parade at the Spring Festival, starring in a local news feature, visiting Summit Paws to greet new animals and encourage nervous adopters. Their days were busy, happy, and for the first time in years, ordinary in the best sense. But even in the heart of joy, life was waiting to test their courage once again. It was the day of the annual street fair, a big event that took over downtown. Booths lined the streets, packed with games and food, children dashing between music stages and face-painting tents. Sophie wore a bright red t-shirt that matched Rex's new bandana, her hair braided with tiny sunflowers by her mother that morning. Rex, now almost unrecognizable from the snarling creature he'd once been, padded calmly beside her, his therapy dog and training badge gleaming. Sophie's mother walked ahead, scanning for friends in the crowd. The day was hot and thick with noise, laughter, vendors calling, the distant whoop of a police siren. Rex stuck close to Sophie, weaving skillfully through the maze of legs and strollers. The two had become such a team that Sophie barely noticed how instinctively she trusted him to watch out for her. Then, without warning, the world fractured. Somewhere up the block, a fire alarm screamed, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through music and chatter. For a split second, everyone froze. Then chaos erupted. Vendors abandoned booths, parents grabbed children, and the crowd surged. Sophie's mother was swept forward, calling Sophie's name, her voice drowned in the sudden roar of the crowd. Sophie, jolted by a panicked woman brushing past, lost her grip on her wheelchair controls. She spun, the wheels locking as people rushed around her, unable to see her in the sea of moving legs. The world tilted, faces, feet, the sound of fear rising like a storm. Rex, momentarily separated, barked once, a loud, desperate call. Sophie's heart hammered, panic clouding her vision as she tried to get her bearings. She could see nothing but chaos. And then, a flash of fur, a blur of movement, Rex appeared, forcing his way through the terrified throng, ignoring the kicks and shouts. He reached Sophie's side, pressing his body against her wheelchair, steadying it as she clung to his fur. People pushed and stumbled, but Rex refused to move. He barked again, louder, the sound cutting through the noise. Somewhere a firefighter heard and turned, but Sophie was not the only one in trouble. As Rex barked for help, he caught a strange scent, smoke, fear, a child's cry. He whirled, ears up, nose twitching. There, in a narrow alley beside the food trucks, a small boy was trapped behind a toppled table, his arm pinned. Flames licked at a pile of cardboard boxes nearby. Rex lunged, tugging Sophie's wheelchair close enough that she could see the boy's frightened face. "Help!" Sophie shouted, her own voice barely audible above the noise. Rex barked, insistent, frantic, refusing to leave until someone paid attention. Finally, a firefighter spotted them. He followed Rex's barking and Sophie's waving arms, racing down the alley. Together they managed to pull the boy free, Sophie comforting him as Rex barked for the paramedics. The crowd, seeing the commotion, began to quiet. Emergency crews took control, herding people to safety, the danger passing as quickly as it had arrived. Sophie's mother appeared, frantic and in tears, hugging her daughter so tightly Sophie could barely breathe. You're safe, thank God you're safe," she sobbed. When the dust settled and the street fair slowly resumed, stories rippled through the crowd about the girl in the wheelchair and her brave dog who had saved not just her, but another child. The mayor arrived, shaking Sophie's hand and pinning a shiny medal to Rex's collar. "A hero," she declared, her voice ringing over the applause. Today, this town saw what real courage looks like. For Sophie, it was a blur. One moment fear, the next relief, then pride as she watched Rex stand at attention, chest out, head high. People pressed forward to thank them, children hugging Rex, adults wiping away tears. That night, the local news ran the story. Dog saves child, reunites family amidst chaos at downtown fair. The phones at Summit Paws Rescue rang non-stop. New families eager to adopt second-chance dogs. The shelter director beamed, saying, "Sophie and Rex showed us all what's possible." At home, Sophie curled up in bed, Rex sprawled across her feet, her mother stroking her hair. "You saved him once," her mother whispered, voice choked with emotion. "But today, he saved you, and someone else too." Sophie hugged Rex tight, her cheek pressed to his fur. "We're a team," she murmured, her voice sleepy but sure. "We always will be." Outside, the city glowed under a sky swept clean by summer storms, and in the Caldwell house, the light of courage shone brighter than ever, a beacon for everyone who'd ever felt afraid, alone, or lost. The weeks following the street fair felt different in Denver, and not just for the Caldwell family. Something about the chaos, the smoke, the way Rex barked and refused to back down had left an imprint on the town's collective heart. Everywhere Sophie and Rex went, people stopped to thank them, to ask for pictures, to tell them how their bravery had inspired a new way of seeing. Yet for Sophie, the real changes were quieter, more personal. She no longer felt the ache of being invisible. Teachers at school greeted her with warm smiles. Classmates invited her to join new activities, and parents who once pulled their children away from Rex now asked if he might visit their homes. Still, Sophie noticed the old fears lingered just below the surface. The world could so easily forget how quickly someone labeled broken or dangerous could become a hero. One Saturday morning, Sophie and her mother returned to Summit Paws Rescue for a community event. The shelter buzzed with life, adopters, volunteers, families, and children hoping to meet their own version of Rex. Posters featuring Sophie and Rex's faces hung by the entrance. See beyond the label, find the heart. In a sun-filled room, Sophie joined a circle of kids, some in wheelchairs, some with casts, others just nervous, clutching the hands of worried parents. She spoke softly, but her voice carried. I used to be scared all the time. I thought no one could understand what it's like to feel different, or to be hurt, or to wonder if you'll ever fit in again. Then I met Rex. He was called dangerous. I was called broken. But neither of us gave up. A small boy in a blue cast wiped his eyes, a quiet sniffle escaping as he hugged his mother. Sophie wheeled over and let Rex nuzzle the boy's hand, his big brown eyes full of warmth and gentleness. Sometimes, Sophie continued, the ones who seem scariest just need someone to believe in them. Parents and staff listened, moved by the sight of Sophie and Rex, a living testament to resilience and compassion. Sophie's mother sat on a folding chair near the back, jotting thoughts in her journal as tears slid down her cheeks. Her words later that night captured the transformation perfectly. I used to believe courage was never being afraid, but now I know it's showing up for each other, even when we're terrified. Sophie taught me that. Rex taught me that. We are all more than our wounds. Throughout the afternoon, Sophie and her mom met with families considering problem dogs. They listened to stories of stubbornness, fear, and heartbreak. They offered advice, encouragement, and sometimes just a quiet hand to hold. Rex lay beside Sophie, his presence calming the anxious and inviting the hesitant. When a little girl in a leg brace began to cry, Rex nuzzled her, resting his chin on her knee until she giggled through her tears. The shelter director stood before the crowd, pride shining in his eyes. What we learned from Sophie and Rex, he said, is that real healing comes from community. We all need someone to listen, someone to accept us as we are. That's how we change lives, not just for dogs, but for people too. As the sun dipped lower, Sophie wheeled herself out to the shelter's backyard, where Rex rolled in the grass like a puppy. She watched him for a while, thinking about the journey they'd traveled together, each small victory, each setback, every day they'd chosen hope over despair. She remembered the first time she'd seen Rex, wild and angry, and how terrified she'd been to reach out. She remembered the way her heart hammered in her chest as she slipped her hand through the bars, and the relief, the pure wonder when he trusted her. That trust had changed everything for both of them. Sophie's mother joined her, sitting on the grass with a sigh. "Do you realize what you two have done?" she asked, her voice full of awe. "You turned fear into love. You taught a whole town that every story deserves a second chance." Sophie smiled, her eyes shining. "I think Rex did most of the work." Her mother laughed, pulling her close. "No, sweetheart, you both did." That night, Sophie wrote her own journal entry, her words careful and slow. True courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the hard thing, the scary thing, because someone else needs you. It's believing there's something good on the other side of pain, even when you can't see it yet. Labels are just words. They don't know our stories. They can't tell us what we're capable of. Sometimes the strongest people and the bravest dogs are the ones everyone else gave up on. The next week, Sophie and Rex were invited back to the school for a special assembly. This time, instead of just sharing their story, they listened as other children and teachers spoke about their own fears, challenges, and hopes. The gym was filled with honesty, laughter, and for the first time, a sense that no one needed to hide. The community, once divided by fear and misunderstanding, had become a place of empathy and belonging. People opened their homes to hard-to-place dogs. Neighbors reached out to families struggling with illness or loss. Kids learned to look past surface differences and see the heart inside. And all across Denver, people remembered, courage is a choice, healing is a journey, and hope is something we build together. As Sophie and Rex left Summit Paws that day, they looked back at the shelter one last time, hearts full of gratitude and dreams for the future. Years drifted by in Denver, marked not by the ache of what was lost, but by the steady rhythm of new beginnings. The Caldwell home, once haunted by quiet grief, was now alive with laughter, morning sunlight, and the joyful chaos that comes from living with hope. Sophie, now 16, had grown tall and strong in her wheelchair. Her face was more angular, her hair longer, and her gaze, always searching, had become quietly confident. Rex, older too, his once dark muzzle now streaked with white, remained by her side. He moved more slowly these days, favoring his left hip, but his eyes sparkled with the same fierce loyalty and devotion. Every Saturday, Sophie volunteered at Summit Paws Rescue, helping dogs who reminded her of Rex, the difficult ones, the frightened, the ones the world had written off. She'd wheel through the kennels, offering soft words and gentle hands, coaxing hope from behind wary eyes. Sometimes she would bring Rex along, letting the new arrivals see a living miracle, a dog who had survived, healed, and learned to trust again. Sophie's mother had started a support group for families with children facing challenges, physical, emotional, or simply the trials of growing up different. Parents met in the community center basement, sharing stories and tears and laughter, building a net of support that grew stronger with every meeting. One bright June morning, Sophie and Rex were invited to lead Denver's annual Heroes Parade. The streets overflowed with cheering crowds. Sophie wheeled beside Rex, who wore his faded therapy dog bandana, and waved to neighbors, old classmates, and children who saw themselves in her courage. Some held signs, "Thank you, Sophie and Rex. Second chances matter," and every so often someone called out, "You're our hero!" Sophie's heart swelled at the sight of it all. She saw the faces of children she'd encouraged, dogs she'd helped place with new families, and even teachers from her old school waving with tears in their eyes. She glanced at Rex, whose tail wagged as if he knew exactly what was happening, and felt a gratitude so profound it almost hurt. At the end of the parade, the mayor called Sophie to the podium. The microphone trembled in her hand as she looked out over the sea of faces, the city she once thought would never understand her. "I used to believe that being broken meant being hopeless," Sophie began, her voice clear, the years of struggle woven into every syllable. "But Rex showed me that scars aren't the end of a story. They're the beginning. Every fear, every pain, every moment we almost gave up, that's what gave us the strength to keep trying. And that's what I want everyone here to remember. Nobody is just the worst thing that ever happened to them." The crowd was silent, the kind of silence that is sacred. Sophie continued, "When you open your heart to someone, dog or person, who needs you most, you change their life. But they'll change yours, too. Every day, in small ways, we get to write a new chapter." People rose to their feet, applause ringing down the block, echoing off buildings. Sophie looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail and nuzzled her hand. He was older now, his steps a bit stiff, but he had become more than a hero. He was a symbol for the entire city. That evening, Sophie and her mother brought Rex to the shelter for a celebration. Staff from every year of his journey gathered to share stories, how they'd once feared him, how Sophie's courage had opened their eyes. The director handed Sophie a framed photo. The three of them on Rex's first day home, nervous and hopeful, forever changed. As the sun slipped behind the Rockies, Sophie led Rex to the hill behind the shelter, where wildflowers nodded in the twilight breeze. They sat together, side by side, watching the golden light spill across the city. Sophie ran her fingers through Rex's fur, feeling the old scars, the strength, the years of loyalty and love. "I think we did good, buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed more than just my life. You changed a whole town." "Maybe more." Rex leaned in, breathing slow and even, his head resting in Sophie's lap. Above them, the sky blazed with the last colors of day. Sophie thought of all they'd learned. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to show up for each other. That being different is not a weakness, but a gift, an invitation to see the world through kinder eyes. That healing happens in small acts of love, repeated every day until hope becomes a habit. The Caldwell family's story rippled out, touching lives they would never know. Summit Paw's rescue became a beacon for second chances, and every year, more families chose to adopt the dogs no one else wanted, remembering Sophie and Rex, and what could happen when you refused to give up. As night fell and the stars blinked awake, Sophie and Rex sat in the hush, their silhouettes fused by memory and faith. No longer outcasts, but proof that, in a world full of brokenness, there is always a way forward, and always hope.